Christopher Nolan just put a 60-foot Cyclops on screen with the Odyssey. But strip away 3,000 years of storytelling, and a lot of Homer's monsters start looking less like fantasy and more like field reports. A skull in a cave, a seal on a rock, a whirlpool that's still spinning today. We're going through Odysseus's voyage, monster by monster, to find out what the real-life counterparts of each creature is.
Polyphemus, the skull in a cave. Start with the Cyclops, because this is the strongest case in the entire poem. In 1914, an Austrian paleontologist named Othenio Abel was studying fossil beds across Sicily, Malta, Crete, and Cyprus, and he noticed something. These islands are full of the skulls of an extinct species called the dwarf elephant. Some species stood barely 3 feet tall at the shoulder, and an elephant skull has a single, massive hole in the center of its face, not the eye sockets, which are small and set to the sides. That hole is where the trunk attached. To someone who's never seen a living elephant, and the ancient Greeks hadn't, that skull doesn't read as an elephant, it reads as a giant with one huge eye socket, dead center, twice the size of a human skull. Sicily happens to be exactly where Homer places Polyphemus. Here's the twist, though. Abel also claimed the Greek philosopher Empedocles had personally documented finding these skulls in Sicilian caves. Classic scholar Adrienne Mayer went looking for that reference decades later for her book The First Fossil Hunters, and found nothing. No surviving text ties Empedocles to elephant skulls at all. Abel invented that part. So the theory isn't airtight, but the core of it still holds up on geography and anatomy alone, and nobody's found a better explanation. A 3-foot-tall extinct elephant, misread by people with zero reference point for what an elephant even was. That's Polyphemus.
The Laestrygonians, same trick, bigger bones. Right after escaping the Cyclops, Odysseus loses 11 of his 12 ships to a race of cannibal giants called the Laestrygonians. No skull theory here, but the mechanism is identical, just scaled up. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote about oversized bones being dug up and treated as proof of a lost race of giants. Centuries later, a Sicilian historian named Tommaso Fazello used similar bone finds from Sicily and Sardinia to argue the islands were originally settled by giants. These weren't elephant skulls specifically. Femurs, limb bones, whatever large Pleistocene animal happened to be buried there. Wrong animal, same conclusion. Something huge used to walk around here, so the people who lived here first must have been huge too. It's a weaker case than the Cyclops. There's no single fossil species anyone can point to. But it's the same fossil-to-legend pipeline running twice in the same stretch of coastline, which says something about how often this actually happened in the ancient world.
The Sirens, the sound you can't ignore. The Sirens don't just tempt Odysseus's crew. Their song is supposed to be involuntary. You hear it, you steer toward it. No choice involved. The leading real-world candidate is the Mediterranean monk seal, now critically endangered, down to under 1,000 animals, but once common on rocky Aegean coastlines. The Roman writer Aelian, writing in the 2nd century, described seals lying on rocks and crying out in a way he said was fatal to anyone who heard it. That's not a modern guess. That's a direct ancient source describing the exact behavior. Sound has a fast lane straight to the emotional centers of the brain, bypassing conscious thought entirely. A seal's cry, echoing off open water at a distance, with nothing to compare it to, would sound less like an animal and more like something calling you on purpose. And Homer's fix is basically a controlled experiment. Wax in the crew's ears removes the signal completely. Odysseus stays tied to the mast, so he hears everything, but can't act on it. Cut the sensory input, the compulsion disappears. That's not folklore logic, that's just how the auditory pathway actually works.
Scylla, the monster with many arms. 6 heads, 12 legs, guarding a cliff face across from Charybdis. Scylla is the most monster-shaped monster in the whole poem, and the leading theory is almost disappointingly simple. Giant squid or giant octopus. Ancient writers, including Aristotle and Pliny the Elder, both wrote about massive cephalopods living in exactly this stretch of the Mediterranean. And in the 20th century, researchers found a genuine deep colony of black coral near the Strait of Messina, the traditional location of Scylla's cliff, which renewed interest in the idea that something large enough to inspire the myth could still be living down there, rarely seen, mostly dead by the time it surfaces. There's a second theory worth mentioning. The Calabrian coast, where Scylla supposedly lives, sits on an active fault line. The 1908 Messina earthquake killed tens of thousands of people on both shores. So Scylla might be a squid, or she might be the coastline itself, unpredictable and violent for reasons that have nothing to do with animals at all. Either way, the ancient Greeks weren't making up danger where none existed. Charybdis. In Homer's text, Charybdis barely has a body. She's introduced by what she does. 3 times a day she swallows the sea, and 3 times a day she spits it back out, pulling ships into a whirlpool across the strait from Scylla. Scholars later gave her a physical form, a bloated bladder-like body with flippers where her arms and legs should be, and a mouth wide enough to take in the whole sea. Taking the creature version seriously, the best real match is the basking shark. Its scientific name, Ceterinus maximus, translates out of Greek as great-nosed sea monster, and people were calling this a monster before biologists ever got involved. Basking sharks are documented specifically around Sicily and the Strait of Messina, the same stretch of water Homer places Charybdis in. They feed by swimming slowly at the surface with a mouth up to 4 feet wide held open for minutes at a time, filtering thousands of gallons as they go. Of every animal on this list, that's the closest thing to actually watching something swallow the sea. Now the whirlpool half, the half Homer actually wrote, that part is just real. The Strait of Messina sits between 2 seas, the Tyrrhenian and the Ionian, that don't rise and fall in sync. That mismatch drives a tidal current that reverses roughly every 6 hours, and at the narrowest point of the strait, a whirlpool forms called the Garofalo. For a rowed ship with no engine, that current alone was a real hazard. Add a shark a length of a school bus cruising the same water with its mouth open, and you've got 2 separate, real phenomena that got folded into one monster. The cattle of Helios. After Charybdis, Odysseus's crew lands on an island with 7 herds of sacred cattle belonging to the sun god, and they're warned, repeatedly, not to touch them. They get stranded by bad wind, run out of food, and eat the cattle anyway. Every single one of them drowns for it. This entry doesn't need a fossil theory, because the animal was never mythical to begin with. What's actually interesting here is the aurochs, the wild ancestor of every domestic cow alive today, and a truly extinct animal, hunted to its last individual in Poland in 1627. Julius Caesar described aurochs as almost the size of an elephant. Cattle were central to Greek religious life. Killing one wasn't a casual transaction, it was a ritual act, and doing it without permission was treated as an offense against the gods themselves. So this isn't a myth about a fake animal, it's a myth about the actual social weight cattle carried in the ancient world, wrapped around a species that, coincidentally, doesn't exist anymore either. Argos. 20 years after Odysseus leaves for Troy, he comes home in disguise, and the only one who recognizes him instantly is his old hunting dog, lying neglected on a pile of dung. Argos wags his tail, and then he dies, right there, like he'd been holding on just long enough. So what real animal inspired Argos? A dog. It's a dog. That's it. That's the entry. But there's a good detail hiding in the joke. In Nolan's film, Argos is played by a Portuguese pudengo, a real breed whose ancestors are believed to have arrived in the region on Phoenician trading ships more than 2,500 years ago. It's one of the only breeds alive today with a lineage old enough to plausibly have existed in Homer's world. So the casting isn't just sentimental, it's close to historically accurate. And the loyalty part isn't fiction either. It's just what dogs have been doing for their owners for as long as they've been domesticated. 7 seemingly otherworldly monsters, and most of them trace back to something that was actually standing there. Elephant skulls, seals on rocks, a whirlpool that hasn't stopped since the Bronze Age. The Odyssey wasn't just a story people told for fun.
It was how people explained the parts of their world they didn't have better words for yet. If you enjoyed this one, let me know in the comments which entry surprised you the most, and subscribe for more.